Okay, I'll change that later on. It's probably saying 14 on yours, but it's actually 15. But
I'm getting the music.
yeah, but it's the actual link, the actual YouTube page itself. I don't know if it's saying 14 or
It's
15.
fine. It says part 15.
Yeah, it's saying 14. I'll change that later because there's already a 14
No, it
going.
says 15.
It says 15.
Oh, it does? Okay. It's saying 14 on this thing here. Okay. Very good. All right.
Just getting the music.
Well,
Oh, there it is.
should have more than the music now.
It just popped up.
Oh, it did. It's on the speed. I mean, it's on the faster one. I don't know why it's taking that long, but we're not changing the slides, so it shouldn't be that bad. Not really changing the slides, so should be all right now. So as you see, we're on 25. But before we start, I want to ask if anybody have any prayers or anything special they want to say, any testimony or anything of the sort before we get started with this, continuing. If not, then we'll go ahead and let me just have prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. Thank you for your love. Thank you for allowing me to make it back here safely. I pray that you continue to be with each and last one of us here that's online and those that may hear later on as well, or those that we hear on YouTube. We pray that you be with us and help us, Father, that we would get a clear understanding of your word as we study it, and that it would resonate into our hearts and minds. This and all of the blessings we ask in our Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay. So we left off on the last verse that we read was verse 31 last night. So now we're in chapter 25. Start with verse. Let's do. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's go to verse 43. So let's go from 32 to 43, and you all can read however you want to. 32 to 43. So that's what, 12 verses? So whoever want to start reading. Don't rush.
Okay, 32 to 43.
Yes.
All right, 32. Leviticus 25:32. Notwithstanding the cities of the Levites and the houses of the cities of their possession, may the Levites redeem at any time. And if a man purchase of the Levites, then the house that was sold in the city of his possession shall go out in the year of Jubilee. For the houses of the cities of the Levites are their possession among the children of Israel. But the field of the suburbs of their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. And if thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him. Yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, then he may live with thee. Take thou no usury of him, or increase, but fear thy Yah, and thy brother may live with thee. Thou shalt not give him thy money upon usury, or lend him thy victuals for increase. I am Yahuwah your Yah, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your Yah. And if thy brother that dwelleth by thee be waxen poor, and be sold unto thee, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondservant. For as an hired servant and as a sojourner, he shall be with thee, and shall serve thee unto the year of Jubile. And well, I guess it's Jubilee. Is that
Jubilee,
Jubilee?
yeah,
Okay.
Jubilee.
And then shall he depart from thee, both he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family, and unto the possession of his fathers shall he return. For they are my servants, which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondsmen.
Okay, going back to verse 32, looking at verse 32 and 33 and 34, it says, 32 and 33, notwithstanding the cities of Levites and the houses of the cities of their possession, may the Levites redeem at any time. Now, we already been through the process of what the 6 years that they had to, the 6 years that the land laid, that they had to sow the land, and the 7th year was like a Sabbath year, and times 7 was 49 years, and it started at 50th year on the Day of Atonement of that 50th year. Starting on there was supposed to be the year of Jubilee, a special year. People can, they get their belongings back, they go back to their inheritance, they go back to their families. If during the process of time up until the Jubilee time, it wasn't worked out where that could already had happened. So that's why Jubilee was a big thing. And we talked about how it was important about, yesterday we talked a little bit about the, we talked about how in the 6th year, how Yah blessed them so much till that in that 6th year, he gave them the blessings of 3 years over in verse 21. When you look at verse 21, he gave them the blessing of 3 years for that one. And I was doing that, saying that as an example to when Yah gave them the manna, how he gave them manna each day, and they were supposed to eat it until the morning, or else it was spoiled. However, on the 6th day, he gave them twice as much, and that same manna didn't spoil the 2nd day because they weren't supposed to work on the 2nd day. So therefore, they were able to gather twice as much, and it's saved over for the next day. That just tell you how wonderful Yah is. And when he says things, that's what he means when he says it. There's no tap dancing around in it. That is what he says is what he says. It's what it goes. Then we talked about yesterday how the dwelling of a man in a walled city, like not just Jerusalem, all the cities that was there once they built their cities in a walled city. So you had people that was owning property in the walled cities as well. And they had like a year, once they purchased it, they had like a year to sell it. And if they didn't, it still remained part with the owner. And they had all these rules and regulations that Yah gave them, dealing with the Jubilee and dealing with just owning property and dealing with each other and dealing with the poor. So here we are now in verse 32, and it's talking about the Levites now. And we know who the Levites were. The Levites were the ones that was in the ministry. So they were required, the children of Israel, and I believe Sabbath. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, Sabbath, in the message, I believe. But the Levites were required, I should say the children of Israel were required to allow the Levites to dwell in all their cities of the children of Israel. They didn't have any inheritance, as everybody remembers. They didn't have any inheritance, but they were Yah's possession, if I can use that terminology. He made sure they were taken care of. He said, he showed that the Levites was a peculiar people because it was for the interest of the public that they should not be impoverished or weaseled out of the inheritance. The inheritance being that they didn't have land like outside of the cities and nothing like that. Their inheritance was Yah, really, just like everybody else's inheritance was his. But they had the purpose of the ministry. That's what they were supposed to do. And Yah took care of them. He fed them through the children of Israel. They was taken care of through all the tribes. And all the fields that joining to their cities might not be sold at any time, for they belong not to the particular Levites, but to the city of the Levites as a corporation who could not alienate without wrong to their tribes. Therefore, if any of those fields were sold, the bargain was void. They weren't allowed to do that. Even the Egyptians took care to preserve the land of the priests themselves. You go over to Genesis 47. Even they took care of the priests. Go to Genesis 47 and look at verse 20, 47 verse 22. So let's start with verse 20 first. And Joseph brought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field. Because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the border of Egypt even to the other end thereof. In verse 22, only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion with Pharaoh, gave them wherefore they sold not their land. So even the priests of Egypt then, even they were taken care of by the Egyptians. So surely Yah can take care of his priests. And that's what he did. That's exactly what he is. And there was no less importance for maintaining, I'm going to call it the gospel, even though I know everybody wants to say commandments and all that, and the law and all that, but it still was Yah's word. So it still was the gospel. It still was the news being spread. At that time, the statute and the judgments and the ordinances and the commandments, they all were being spread. And that was important at that time anyway. Throughout the course of history, they were the children of Israel. They were supposed to spread the gospel throughout the world. That's what they were supposed to have been doing, but we know the story behind that, what happened there. So going back to 25, and then looking there at 34, but 33, and if a man purchase of the Levites, then the house that was sold, the city of his possession, shall go out in their year of Jubilee. For the houses of the cities of the Levites are their possession among the children of Israel. But the field, 34, but the field of the suburbs of their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. So that was, there were village. So what it was like, I can visualize this for a second. They divide, and I don't have the drawing, but you all can put it up online and see how all the tribes were divided out there in the Canaan land, how they were divided out outside of Judah, how they all were dispersed out, and how each section was. And what it was, they had their inheritance. Manasseh had an inheritance, and Naphtali had his inheritance, and Benjamin, all of them had their inheritance. But each one of the tribes, they had to provide an inheritance or a portion of what they had in the land for the Levites. Cities, what they call the Levite cities. They had to provide those cities for the Levites. Now, besides those cities for the Levites, there was also the actual cities themselves, like Jerusalem and all the cities. And outside of those cities were villages that weren't walled up. So you had, let's just use Jerusalem for example. You had Jerusalem, walled city. Then you had villages outside of the walled city that had no walls. Then you had the inheritance of whoever tribe it was outside of there. They had, so these cities of and we'll find out, I believe 7, but I believe it was 48. I think it was a total of 48 Levite cities. It was either 42 or 48, I believe it was. Levite cities that was dispersed out throughout all the Canaan land. So there was portion in all the tribes. And there were villages with no walls next to all the cities, like Jerusalem and all those. So they had rules and regulations as to how property in the inheritance of the land of the tribes were to be distributed. They had rules and regulations of how the walled cities were to take in people who can purchase, even strangers. And that was another way of maintaining and getting strangers there, because by not because the strangers were not allowed to buy the inheritance. The inheritance was part of those tribes. They were the only one that could be part of those tribes. But however, in the walled cities, it wasn't like that. Strangers could purchase some of that. And for them, it would be good because they can then do a lot of trading and back and forth. And that's because they did a lot of, they did a lot of trading and stuff between the cities and say off the Mediterranean, because that's where a lot of the stuff came on shore at, through the Mediterranean. So they can work through the cities like that. So strangers come in, they would stay in the cities, and they could even purchase a house or whatever it is in the city. But within a year time, they would have to, they would have to sell it, or else it'll go to keep with the original owner. They had all these rules, Yah. And what we're reading right now is what Yah gave Moses in the ordinances in Mount Sinai. These ain't Moses' rules, this is Yah's rules. So then when we go to verse 35, and if thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him, yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. You notice it says, if thy brother, you call them brother. So the poor must be relieved. Our brother's poverty and distress, if thy brother be waxen poor, like it says here in the text, not only thy brother by nation as a Jew, but thy brother by nature of any man, a stranger or whoever. Remember what it said, anybody that come into the camp would be a stranger, would be treated as one born of the camp. So all men are to be looked upon and treated as brethren. For we all are one in the Father. Go to Malachi. I think it's in Malachi. Go to Malachi 2, Malachi 2:10. Yahushua is showing us himself through these ordinances and through these rules and through all this. He's showing himself in there. He just hadn't come yet. When he came, then he's showing himself through this, but then when he come, he can actually display himself. People will be able to see him. But if you look at, I think it's Malachi 2:10, I think. Yeah, Malachi 2:10. It says, have ye not all one Father? Have not one Yah created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother? By profaning the covenant of our fathers. So even though a person is poor, yet still he is thy brother, and is to be loved and owned as a brother. Poverty does not destroy the relationships. Does not destroy it. And I can say the same thing now. If you go into the new covenant, where is that at? That when Yahushua speaks about the fact that you do this unto me, you did it unto one of them, you done it unto me. It's still applied. You can use that same terminology that Yahushua said in the new covenant, in the Gospels, and apply it to this right here. Everybody is treated the same. So going back to Leviticus, if you guys have anything, just open up. If you got any comments or questions or whatever you may have, just open up to it. One thing that's so important, and you've heard me say this before, and I think some of you all may have said it as well. We we being us, all of us, we are of the seed, and it makes so much sense. We're of the seed of Abraham, not necessarily the seed of Judah or Reuben or any individual tribe. Is irrelevant because the promise was given to Abraham. And the scripture says that he is the father of all nations. He is the father. It never applied to any of the other tribe members because they weren't even the children of Israel yet during Abraham. They hadn't even they didn't come to children of Israel till Jacob. When Jacob named, after he got through wrestling with the angel, which was Yahushua, so he got through wrestling with him, that's when his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. So Abraham and even Isaac, they weren't Israelites, if you want to call it that yet. It was Abraham. And it says that he was the father of all nations. That's why we're all one, guys. That's why we all one. He said he was going to make him the father of many nations. All nations. So it's no separation here dealing with Yahushua when he's talking about Abraham. He's the father of all the nations. So just keep that in mind. So as long as we talking about the children of Israel, yes, the children of Israel was a selected group that was chosen to spread the gospel at that time, but they are out of Abraham just like all the rest of us from the spiritual, from the Ruach standpoint of faith. We're from the seed of Abraham. All of us are. And the new covenant tells us that. So it shouldn't be any issue with that at all, period. No confusion with that. So now, we should, now again, I wanted to say a little bit more about the poor. So when the poor is poor and they go into decay, they go into having hard times, we should be grievous. We should want to help them because just like Yahushua said, the poor will always be with us. They will always be with us. By sympathy, we should be pitying them, the poor, by service, doing for them, by supply, giving them according to their necessity and their ability, which is no different gospel than what Yahushua spoke. Same thing. Same thing they will conduct themselves in Israel. And you don't see all of this like this until we get to this chapter 25 mainly. But it's here. It's all throughout the scriptures. But you can really see it when you get to 25. You see how Yah wants us all to be in one big family. How he conducts and how he put his ordinances out there for us to follow. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So, looking at verse 36 and 37, take thou no usury of him. You know, usury is like taxes. I believe usury is like taxes, I believe. Can't remember memory. I'm going by memory here, but let me just check to make sure. Anybody know that right off the top of their head? But I believe it's taxes. I just want to make sure. Like, well, not taxes, interest. I think it's like interest. I want to check to make sure. I didn't mean taxes. I mean like an interest. So you charge them and then you charge them interest.
Interest or on a debt.
Or debt. On the debt?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's what interest. Yes, I thought that's what it was. So, like now, when you go, and purchase something, you pay not just for the purchase of the property, but somebody gets paid money for that, like a realtor or whatever it may be. And then there's other costs that goes out for other things that's being paid for. And in this case here, Yahushua was saying that when you take that, no sum for anyone or increase, but fear, notice he said, but fear thy Yah, that thy brother may live with thee. I want to say this, is that, and I mentioned this yesterday, I believe, and I think I did it the day before too, is that our system here today, our system of how it's ran from a financial way or systematic way of being together as a nation is not the same way as where it's been taught here at Sinai. The way that this whole Jubilee thing is taught and how we're supposed to respect the poor, how we're supposed to not overburden the poor, how we're not supposed to give usury or interest to the poor for whatever reason, whatever we do, buy something for them, buy things, whatever it may be, we should never be charging them over and above what the charge is, what the rate is. We should not be taking strangers in. We should be taking strangers in. We should be treating them with the love we would treat anyone as one of our own. There's so many different things, and the way the financial system works, we were talking about yesterday, how they deal with purchasing property and who gets the property, and in the scriptural days, like during this time right here, during the time of Jubilee, as you get closer, at the further away you, let's say within the first 6 years of the first 7 years, you got 7 sevens, so the first 7 years, Scripture teaches that if you had purchased property and then you want to sell it before the Jubilee, you would make more if you in the first 7 years, within the first 6 years, I'm going to say 6, because the 7th year was the Sabbath rest. So that within the first 6 years, you would make more money because you got 44 more years left, and you can then charge more, and that's the thing we read about. You could then charge more than you would if it was, say, within the 5th 7-year period. Say you would then, say 13 years or so, or 14 years or so before Jubilee, and you decided to sell your property. You would get less that way than you would if you sold it early on before Jubilee. The further you away from Jubilee, the more you would get. Today, you have an older house that's been sitting for 30 years, because even when I sold my house, I got more for selling my houses being older than it is when I first got it. For whatever reason. They always say because the market allows it, because of this, because of that. That was unacceptable during the scriptural days. That's not the way they did that. That's not the way it handled. Go back, for those who may have forgotten, go back to verse 16. Go back to verse 16. Well, let's look at 15 first. It says, according to the number of years after the Jubilee, thou shalt buy of thy neighbor, and according to the number of years of the fruit, he shall sell unto them. According to the multitude of years, thou shalt increase the price thereof, and according to the fewness of years, thou shalt diminish the price of it. For according to the number of the years of the fruit doeth he sell unto thee. So as you get closer and closer to Jubilee, the price of whatever you selling goes down and it's supposed to going up. And that's the way, and I can understand that because Yah is trying to keep this from being like we have now. The market, this whole, and the priest was the one who set the prices and everything. The priest was the one they went to determine what the prices would be. And some of that we'll see when we get to chapter 27, especially when they're talking about dedication of vows and all that kind of stuff. The priests are the one who put an estimate to it, more so or less. The priest here can oversee things, but the people still negotiated amongst themselves, but there was no usury. They couldn't do no interest, none of that kind of stuff. Whatever it's sold for, it's sold for. That's it. You didn't say what it sells for, I'm just using American dollars. It sells for $300, but then I'm going to charge you extra 10%. No, it wasn't like that. You couldn't do that. None of that wasn't allowed. So, back to 36. Take thou no usury of him or increase, but fear thy Yah, that thy brother may live with thee. 37. Thou shalt not give him thy money upon usury, nor lend him thy victuals for increase. So, poor debtors must not be oppressed. If the brother be waxen poor, and have occasion to borrow money of thee for the necessity or necessary support of his family, take thou no usury of him. So if one needs to borrow money from his brother or another brethren to take care of his family, don't say, well, I'll give you the money, but there's a 15% interest on top of that. That's what they're saying. And that was either for money or victuals. So if you needed some food, don't say in return you give me a little extra than what I gave you. He said, no. And thus far, this law binds still, but could never be thought binding with money is borrowed for purchases of land, trade, or other improvements. For there it is reasonable that the lenders share with the borrowers in the profit. The law here is plainly intended for the relief of the poor, to whom it is sometimes as great a charity to lend freely as to give. So, Yah looks after the poor. That's why it's really bad how people are mistreating people in this world today. You got so many people out there in the street, so many people homeless. I mean, you just got, and then you got people living in the 1,000 or 500 acres, one person. And then you got people out here don't have nowhere to stay at. So Yah really looks after the poor. He looks after the poor. In verse 38, it says, I am Yahuwah your Yah, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan and to be your Yah. Listen to what he's saying there. You guys were strangers in that land of Egypt, and I took care of you there. I brought you out of there into an inheritance. Not an inheritance of land that you own. See, because the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. The land that I'm putting you on, this is Yah. The land I'm putting you on, I own this land. You are sojourning and a stranger in the land that I'm providing for you. Thus, if you're a stranger or a sojourner in the land that's not yours but mine, that means that anybody else says everything is mine. That means any other strangers or anybody that comes in the camp is just as much theirs as it is yours, because I am the owner. That's what he's saying. And that's what he's saying to us today. And it's going to be wonderful, because the more and more I read about all this stuff up into Jubilee and everything goes on in Jubilee and all this stuff, the more I think about when we get to that time where we're going to have that Jubilee in heaven. When we're going to get to that time where we ain't got to worry about poor. We ain't got to worry about whether somebody's on the street. Because when he makes the new earth, the new heaven and new earth, we all going to be the same. We all going to be equal to the same, because he ain't had no respect to persons. We all going to be the same. We all going to have our inheritance. He's going to give us our inheritance when we're there. Not that we deserve it. We don't own it. We don't own the new earth. We don't own any of that. We're going to be it'll be like sojourners and strangers in a land that we never seen before. But because he loves us, and he tells us in Revelation chapter 21 that he will be our Yah and we will be his people, that means it's going to be just like it says in chapter 25 when it says in verse 19, verse 18 and 19 in 25, when it says, wherefore ye shall do my statutes and keep my judgments and do them, and ye shall dwell in the land in safety. No one's going to bother you as long as you do what you're supposed to do. Solomon, 40 years he ruled, and there was peace around him for 40 years. Yah is telling them, you obey and follow my statutes, follow my ordinances. There will be safety for you. See, when we get into the kingdom, we're going to have safety. We ain't got to worry about no enemies. We ain't got to worry about anybody attacking us. None of that kind of stuff. We would have safety in Yahushua. Everything that's in here, almost everything that's in here, we can almost apply it to the end time, to the time when we go into the kingdom. Obviously, a lot of things in here we don't have to be concerned about, but we're going to have this place called heaven. We're going to have this place where we're going to have our mansions, represent like the walled cities. Remember that city going to be walled? It's going to be 144 cubits high. Remember that? It's going to be 12,000 furlongs. Remember that? The foundation we made out of 12 stones. Remember that? The gates are going to be made, is going to be 12 gates. Remember that? The city is going to be, the temple is going to be Yahushua and the Father themselves. Remember that. There will be no light in the temple itself because the light is the Father and the Son. Remember that. There's going to be a tree of life that leads up to the city that we're going to be able to eat out of each month. 12 months. Not any amount. 12 months. And it's for healing of the nation. Remember that. It says that he that does his will be able to enjoy the treasures of heaven. Remember that. All of that reminds me of a jubilee. That reminds me of a very happy moment we're going to have. That's what the jubilee represents. When they blew that shofar for that uncertain sound, because that sound was different than the sound that they probably heard when they had the calling of the assemblies for the Sabbaths, when they had the calling of the assemblies for the feast. That jubilee was a special day. That was a special year, I should say. That first day of jubilee was a special day of that year. And that whole year they could be freed up. That was a special year. And I'm telling you right now, we're going to have a special eternity. We're going to have a special eternity. That's what we're going to have. So when I look at this jubilee, there's so much I can apply to when we get into the kingdom. But then when we get to the new covenant, is the jubilee in its entirety, is that still to be followed? Now, we'll find all that out when we get to the new covenant. So, back on 25, and let's go down there to verse 39. 39, and if thy brother that dwelleth by thee be waxen poor, and he sold unto thee, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondsman. Don't keep him in bondage, but as a hired servant, and as a sojourner, he shall be with thee, and shall serve thee until the year of Jubilee. But you all keep in mind that if someone that had an inheritance, let's just say somebody of the tribe of Naphtali had an inheritance, but he no longer could keep his inheritance because whatever it was, he couldn't upkeep his crops, he couldn't do this, he couldn't do that, and he had to sell it, and he sold it to someone else. Rest assured that if he not able to buy it back before Jubilee, when Jubilee came, he would get it back, and he in turn, if he had went to be a servant with whoever bought it, he in turn would come back to his family, to his kinsmen. So that Jubilee is a wonderful thing, because Jubilee, there is no more bondage in that little period. There is none, because everybody's freed. When we get to heaven, everybody's free, but it's eternity. We're free for eternity. Not just through a period of time and get back the way you are and wait to the next Jubilee and all this stuff. No. We're going to have an eternal Jubilee. This is an annual, this is a Jubilee that happened every 50 years. We're going to have an eternal Jubilee. That's the way I look at it, personally. Verse 40, but as a hired servant, again, and as a sojourner, he shall be with thee and shall serve thee into the year of Jubilee. And then, verse 41, and then shall he depart from thee, but he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family, and unto the possession of his father shall he return. For then are my parents, which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt, they shall not be sold as bondsmen. Thou shalt not rule over him with rigor. Y'all remember that? But shall fear thy Yah. You all should remember that. Over the book of Exodus, how they was treated. That's the reason why they got to keep in mind at that time how you were treated. How you were treated. If you go to Exodus chapter 1 and you look there at verse 12, starting with verse 12. Verse 11. It says, therefore they didn't set over them taskmasters. This is after the other Pharaoh had died, and the older generation had died as well. All the brethren were gone. Of course, that's in verse 6. But if you jump to verse 11, therefore they set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. 12. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And at verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And Yah is reminding them here. He's reminding them in verse 3, thou shalt not rule over him with rigor, but shall fear thy Yah. You should fear thy Yah. You know, there's laws concerning servitude, how you serve someone, designed to preserve the honor of the Jewish nation as a free people. And they were rescued by Yahuwah out of the house of bondage into this glorious liberty of Yah's son. Now think about this. His firstborn, think about this. Why would Yah rescue them out of rigor labor, but then bring them into the nation of Canaan and still have them impose on each other rigorous labor? That means they went from one spot when someone was oppressing them to now they're going somewhere else to oppress each other. That don't even make any sense. That's why Yah had these rules. That's why he had these rules for them to fall, so they did not fall into that pattern of belittling and doing rigorous, cruelty amongst each other. They were supposed to love each other in love. They were supposed to treat each other in love. They were not to show the same thing that the Egyptians showed to them. They were not supposed to do that. And Yah had to put a system in order, because think about this for a second. If Yah had not put a system in order, what do you think the children of Israel would have did when they came out of Egypt into the promised land? We already know what they did as they was traveling. They're building a golden calf. They're getting stuff that they got out of Egypt. Their mindset was like Egypt's mindset. So if Yah didn't give them any kind of rules and regulations to follow, can you imagine? They already disobeyed. So what do you think would have happened if they didn't have any ordinances or guidelines? They had to have ordinances and guidelines. There's nothing wrong. Listen, the universe, this world, I'm not going to say universe, this world, Yah's creation, that's a better word. Yah's creation has to be governed by rules. The whole entire creation is governed by rules. Satan himself, Lucifer, had to be governed by rules. If he wasn't governed by rules, there would have been no justification to kick him out of heaven. He broke rules. There had to be rules in the Garden of Eden. Because if it had not been rules in the Garden of Eden and they sinned, what would have happened is what we were talking about. If you go over to Genesis chapter 3. Verse 22. This is what would have happened in heaven if Yah didn't have rules, if he didn't have statutes and judgments, if he didn't have ordinances, if he didn't have commands, if he didn't have commandments. This is what would have happened with the woman and the man there in the garden. Verse 22, chapter 3, verse 22. And Yahuwah Yah said, behold, the man has become one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also the tree of life and eat and live forever. This is chapter 3. He had already eaten of the tree. That means sin would have been eternal. Yah has to have rules. He has to have ordinances. He had to have guidelines. So if he had it in heaven, he had it in the garden, that means he's going to have it throughout history. Why? Because that means he would have been unfair to Lucifer. He would have been unfair to the woman and the man, because he gave privilege to everybody else. He allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do and it'd be okay. That's why it doesn't make sense when you hear people say obedience and all that stuff is not relevant. Now, it is fully relevant. Fully relevant. But we got to understand how it all goes together. So here it is again. Children of Israel, who Yah chose as his people. Remember, Yah chose them. They didn't choose Yah. He chose them to go forth to spread the gospel, to spread obedience to the surrounding nations, to the strangers, to all of them. Don't adhere to their rules, but they should be adhering to your rules, because your rules is based on the Sinai rules, which is based on the rules that Moses wrote down and the rules from which Yah gave Moses to write down and the rules that Moses wrote down. And both of them were etched in stone with Joshua in the book of Joshua. I believe it's in Joshua. So the point being is Yah is the one who gave them the law. He gave them the understanding and the ordinances. The ordinances, it don't stop. Certain ones has changed only because the purpose of why it changed, the symbology of why it changed. But many of the ordinances are still intact. They're still intact. We just got to find out which ones are still intact, and if there are some that's not intact, why? That's what we want to. That's what we're working toward. That's where we're moving toward. And just keep in mind, if there's no law, if there is no law, then there's really no sin. Because sin is the transgression of the law. So if there's no law, then there's nothing to tell us that we sin, and we know sin brings about death. We know that from 1 Corinthians. In many other places. You can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 And it tells us clearly in chapter 15, it says in verse 53, well, let me go from 52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall put on incorruption, and this mortal shall put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying is written, death is swallowed up in victory. So, O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strip of sin is the law. Because without the law, you won't know what sin is. We have to have rules and regulations. If you want to call them ordinances and statutes or judgments, that's fine. We have to have that. Now, does man rule with judgments and statutes? Supposedly. Is he corrupt? Yes. Is there any I can find that's righteous? No, not one. The rulers that Yah put in place to rule during the days of the children of Israel were supposed to be judges that judge righteously. You didn't look at somebody and judge them by appearance. You didn't look at somebody and judge him by what he had. You judge righteous judgment. But is there any that we can say that's righteous? No, not one. So that means the judges and all the people we had today, oh well. That's why we do what the scripture says in Acts 5:29. See, so when man creates laws and do all this stuff that's contrary to Yah's word, oh, we follow the laws because the laws that's being done, you don't run a stop sign because you don't want to kill somebody. So that's a good law. That's okay. That law is fine. But there's other laws that's contrary to Yah's word, and that's not fine. So you do what Acts 5:29 say, I'd rather obey Yah than man. That makes so much sense. It would be nice if everybody had the right ruach meaning of understanding of scriptures so that everything could be done righteously, done in the right fashion. But unfortunately, we don't have that, and that's not going to be until we make it into the kingdom. This problem is going to exist till Yahushua come back. Just like it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be today. So, continuing on, going back to Leviticus. Back to Leviticus 25, and we end there at 43. So I just, I just want to, just make sure everybody really understands when you read chapter 25, even though it's talking about the Jubilee, there's a lot of ruach meaning, like we just talked about during this evening. There's a lot of ruach meaning that we can get out of these verses. There's a lot we can get out. And I always say this, we can get ruach meaning out of everything. Something is telling us, all these verses tell us something. We have to ask the ruach to give us an understanding of what that is, so that we can apply it appropriately. I mentioned it last night, and I wasn't going to say anything today, and I'm not today. But it's when things rest on my conscience so much like this, I have to say stuff because it's not dealing with this topic here with Leviticus. I got off of this now, but whenever there's, let me just backtrack. There was times in the scriptures in the New Covenant that Paul addressed issues that were going on during his time. Sometimes he called it out, Sometimes he didn't necessarily. When I say call it out, call the people's name out. Sometimes he called it out, but he didn't go into the name thing. You know, I mentioned it last night. I'm not going into the name calling because there's many people in this country probably and in this world that probably think like this. But I have to represent Yah. I have to represent his word. I have to stand tall on his word, regardless of what people may think, what people may say. But Sabbath, before I start the message, I don't know if it's going to be in the announcement parts or it'll probably be right before the message, either or, doesn't matter. I'm just going to reiterate, talk about the things I mentioned, the things last night. And there might be some extra verses and stuff too that I mentioned last night that as Yah's people, we never know who's listening. We never know who's listening on the YouTube channels. We never know who is who they're listening to. We never know what's being said on these YouTube channels unless we listen to them to ourselves, or unless we hear it from somebody else tells us. And some things just need to be solidly addressed. And whatever reason, Yah keeps this on my mind constantly. So that means I need to say something about this. So I can, even though I said it here, it'll probably be more people will reach Sabbath. So that's why I need to say it, Sabbath. And I'm going to wait to the end and bring it up again and talk about it. Just mention what we as Yah's people cannot allow ourselves to be caught in lies, to be caught in trickery, to be caught in deception, and to be caught of misusing of the scriptures. We cannot allow ourselves to be caught up in that. Because as we get closer and closer to that time, Yah is expecting us to understand these scriptures so we can better understand everything we need to understand. What's right, what's wrong. Prophesying when he's coming, time he's coming in, the time, what's going to be going on before he comes. He wants us to know all this. And we do not, I don't want any of us, and I don't want anybody spending time diverting into lies, stuff that's not true, that's taking complete doctrine and destroying scriptural doctrine. So I can't stand by and not say something anymore. I didn't say this like 2 or 3 times, but it hasn't been really in a form like our Sabbath form. And I got to say something Sabbath. It's been in other places, like here and some other studies. But there's this thing I'm talking about. There's no confusion here. The reason why there's confusion, man makes things confused. He makes things more complex than what it is. And if we surely don't study, then we're going to be confused when we shouldn't be. That's too much, way too much evidence to go against this false doctrine right here in the scriptures. So in saying that, I'm really through for the night. Tomorrow, Yah willing, even though I know it's Sabbath, it's really Sabbath evening. We can start. We should be able to finish. We should be able to finish chapter 25 tomorrow. So I'm marking this down. This will be part 16. Okay. We're doing it tomorrow at 6:30 again. Of course, we might be done before the sun set. I don't know, but we'll see. It's probably a little bit easier with you all doing it at home, so nobody's actually here right now. So that makes it a little bit easier. And just if we go to like we're doing now, or go to 8:30, hopefully that should be okay. But Yeah, we should finish 25 tomorrow. 25 has taken a while because 25 really, I did not realize it was going to be like this until I started reading it. So, and studying it as well. So I want to thank Yah for you all. I want to thank him for his mercy and his grace. I want to thank him for allowing all of us to be alive this day. I'm going to continue praying for each one of us and asking you all to pray for me as well. I want to put a special prayer out there for my family on my father's side there, dad's side there, because I mentioned to you that he had died Sabbath, I believe it was, and he was 93. So, Yah gave him 13 years. That's a long time, well past the time that he said he's going to give us. So that was a blessing that he able to live that long. So I'm praying for my sister there because I know she's going. They're on now, I think. I know she's going through quite a bit of stuff up there, doing it, trying to get all this stuff planned out for next month. So just keep praying for them. I don't know if anybody else need any other special prayer, but we just pray for each other. Hey, Denise, how's your daughter doing? I don't know if Denise is still there. Denise, you there?
Denise back.
What's that?
She's on, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think I see her. She might be away from the phone. But anyway,
Yeah.
we if you guys don't have anything else, we can go ahead and have. Huh?
I got a question.
Yes.
You know how we see the people be holding up signs and all of that? Are we supposed to help every one of them we see, or how does that go?
You mean the people that's out there asking for money and all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. I just tell you what I usually do personally. What I usually do, and I know and most of the time, when you get off of exits and stuff is where they at.
Right.
You get off exit or onto exit or whatever, that's where they usually at with signs. I just, I try to keep changing stuff on me to give to them. If I'm not, because sometimes these exits be like 2 lanes in traffic and you just can't give the money to them.
Right.
But I try to give money. I try to give it to them. I don't, I try to do my best. I don't judge them because I know there's been people that does that and they really don't need care, believe it or not. I know it's hard to believe that, but there's some, and I don't get into partitioning out who's being honest and who's not being honest. But I just usually help whoever it is that's standing on the corner if I have to change on me. I try to keep change on me. Sometimes I forget. I try to keep change on me. And I just give it to a great. That's just the way I do it. Because I assume they're in a bad way. Because I assume they're in a bad way. So I just look at trying to help them. I think Yah blesses us for that. I believe he does.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I believe he does. So I don't know what anybody else got any thoughts on that. I don't know how you all handle it. I still look at them as being poor. Again, I don't judge them from the standpoint of whether they really are in need of the money or not. That's in Yah's hands. But I just try to follow through, and if they look like they need, I just try to help them.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Because they had people like that during the scriptural day. It just wasn't right. They wasn't on exits. They didn't have cars.
Right.
Like Yah said, the poor people has always been with us.
Right.
They ain't never been a time where ain't been, because what we talking about now, back in Leviticus, what we talking about now is talking about how poor people were back then. So the poor has always been here. Maybe under different conditions. Now you got streets and people can stand on the streets, but they're still out there begging. They still out there wanting help. So that's the way I look at it.
All right.
Yeah. Anybody else? Denise, are you back yet? I don't know if she's back. Not yet. Well, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and have prayer. Let's bow our heads. Dear Father in heaven, we come before you again. We thank you for your grace and your mercy and your love as usual. We pray, Father, that you would instill in us the strength that we're able to do your will on a consistent basis, not a fluctuated base, but a consistent basis, that we're able to show love and affection for one another, regardless of status, regardless of who we are, whatever, Father. We ask that you would always keep the heart of love in us, always keep our minds focused on you, keep us away from all those things that can pull us away from you, which your word, anything against your word, we don't want to follow because they can pull us even further away from you. So we ask you to be with us and strengthen us and guide us. Give us the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that comes from you. Still that in each and last one of us and help us to blossom like flowers. We thank you, Yah, in your son's name. Amen. All right, everyone. Thank you. I'm sorry we're real late today. By the grace of Yah, we shouldn't be this late tomorrow. Hopefully not.
Okay.
So I'll be talking with everybody. You all have a blessed night.
All right, you too.
All right.
Everyone have a good night. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.